Hands up! Don't move!
I have done nothing wrong.
You're under arrest! Move!
July 14th, 1936, 3:47 p.m. Captain Edward Murphy had been planning this moment for weeks. He wanted maximum humiliation, maximum publicity, maximum impact. So when his officers finally arrested Stephanie St. Clair at her office on Lenox Avenue, he made sure every newspaper in New York knew about it. And he made sure the perp walk, the moment they'd parade her through the streets, would happen during peak hours when the maximum number of people would be watching. Murphy handcuffed Stephanie himself, made it tight, tighter than necessary. He wanted her to feel powerless. "How's it feel, Queenie?" Murphy sneered, using her nickname mockingly. "All that money, all that power, and you're still just another criminal in cuffs." Stephanie looked him dead in the eyes and smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a defeated smile, but a smile that said she knew something he didn't. "Captain Murphy, in 3 days you're going to regret this more than anything you've ever done in your miserable career." Murphy laughed. "Is that a threat?" "It's a prediction," Stephanie said calmly. Then Murphy did exactly what he'd planned. Instead of putting Stephanie in a police car and driving her to the precinct like they did with every other arrest, he decided to march her through Harlem on foot. 6 blocks, from her office to the 32nd Precinct station, right down the main streets where everyone could see. A public humiliation designed to break her spirit and send a message to everyone in Harlem. This is what happens when you challenge us. What Captain Murphy didn't understand, what he couldn't comprehend with his limited, corrupt mind, was that he wasn't just arresting a criminal. He was attacking a mother, a protector, a symbol of everything Harlem had built for itself. And 72 hours later, when hundreds of mothers blocked the streets of New York demanding Stephanie's release, Murphy would learn the hardest lesson of his career. You don't touch Harlem's queen without answering to her kingdom. To understand what happened in those 72 hours, you need to understand who Stephanie St. Clair was to Harlem in 1936. She wasn't just a numbers banker. She was the person who kept the neighborhood running. When families couldn't afford rent, Stephanie paid it. When kids needed school supplies, Stephanie provided them. When the Depression hit Harlem harder than anywhere else, when unemployment for black people hit 60%, Stephanie created jobs. She employed over 300 people directly. Runners, collectors, bookkeepers, security. But beyond that, she supported hundreds more indirectly. She bought from local businesses. She invested in Harlem real estate. She kept money circulating in the community instead of letting it flow out to white-owned businesses downtown. The mothers of Harlem understood this better than anyone. They saw what Stephanie did. They watched her pay for groceries when families were struggling. They saw her fund the free lunch program at PS 139. They knew that when their teenage sons needed work, Stephanie would hire them instead of letting them fall into more dangerous criminal activities. She gave them legitimate options, or at least as legitimate as anything could be in Harlem in 1936. So when Murphy decided to parade Stephanie through the streets like a trophy, he wasn't just humiliating her. He was humiliating every woman who'd been helped by her, every mother who'd watched Stephanie protect their children, every family who'd survived because of her generosity. The perp walk started at 4 p.m. Murphy walked in front, chest puffed out, proud. 2 officers flanked Stephanie on either side, gripping her arms. 4 more officers formed a protective box around them. They'd brought 10 cops for one unarmed woman. The show of force was intentional. "Look how dangerous she is. Look how many officers we need." They walked down Lenox Avenue. The streets were packed. People coming home from work, kids playing, shopkeepers sweeping sidewalks. Everyone stopped to watch. And here's what Murphy expected. He expected people to jeer at Stephanie, to celebrate her arrest, to see her as the criminal he claimed she was. That's not what happened. The first person to react was an elderly woman named Clara Washington. She was 67 years old, had lived in Harlem since 1919, and Stephanie had paid her rent for 6 months in 1934 when Clara's husband died and she couldn't work. Clara saw Stephanie in handcuffs and did something Murphy didn't expect. She started crying. Not quiet tears, but loud, anguished crying. "They got Queenie!" she shouted. "They got our Queenie!" Other women heard her. They came out of shops, out of apartment buildings. They saw Stephanie handcuffed being paraded down their street, and they started crying too. Within 2 blocks there were at least 50 women lining the street, and they weren't jeering. They were mourning. Some were crying. Some were shouting at the police. Let her go. She didn't do nothing wrong. You should be arresting real criminals. Murphy's face turned red. This wasn't the reaction he wanted. He'd expected fear, maybe satisfaction, not this outpouring of support. A young mother named Dorothy Parker, carrying her 2-year-old son, pushed through the crowd. Stephanie paid for my son's medicine when he had pneumonia, she shouted at Murphy. She saved his life while you were taking bribes from the mob. Murphy ignored her, kept walking, but the crowd was growing. By the third block, over 100 people were following the procession. The officers started getting nervous. "Captain, maybe we should call for backup," one of them said. "We're fine," Murphy snapped. "Keep moving." But they weren't fine. The crowd was getting bigger and angrier. Someone threw a tomato that hit one of the officers in the back. Another person threw an egg. "Corrupt pigs!" "Leave Queenie alone," the chants started. "Free Queenie! Free Queenie!" By the fourth block, Murphy realized he'd made a catastrophic mistake. There were now over 300 people following them, and the mood was turning from sadness to rage. These weren't just random people. These were mothers, grandmothers, women who'd been helped by Stephanie, whose families had been protected by her, and they were organizing in real time. A woman named Ruth Morrison, who ran a beauty salon on 135th Street, made a split-second decision that would change everything. She ran ahead of the police procession to a payphone and called the Amsterdam News, Harlem's black newspaper. "They're parading Stephanie St. Clair through the streets like an animal," Ruth said breathlessly. "We need help. We need everyone to know what they're doing to her." The Amsterdam News immediately sent reporters and photographers. Within 30 minutes, journalists were documenting everything. The photographs they took that day would become iconic. Stephanie, head held high, dignity intact despite the handcuffs. Behind her, a sea of black women, crying, shouting, protesting. Murphy finally reached the 32nd Precinct station house. He practically shoved Stephanie through the door, relieved to be off the streets. But outside, the crowd didn't disperse. Over 500 people now stood in front of the precinct, chanting, demanding Stephanie's release. Murphy looked out the window and felt something he rarely experienced. Fear. Not fear of the crowd exactly, but fear of what he'd unleashed. These weren't gangsters or criminals. These were mothers, the moral center of the community. And he'd turned them against the police. Inside the precinct, they processed Stephanie. Fingerprints, mugshot, paperwork. Through it all, she remained calm, almost serene. "You made a mistake today, Captain," Stephanie said as they led her to a holding cell. "You have no idea what you started." "The only mistake," Murphy replied, "was not arresting you years ago." Stephanie laughed. 72 hours, Captain. Give it 72 hours. Murphy didn't understand what she meant. He would soon. The next morning, July 15th, the Amsterdam News ran a front-page story with the headline, "Police Parade Harlem's Protector Like Criminal, Community Outraged." The article detailed everything. Murphy's deliberate choice to walk Stephanie through the streets, the growing crowd of supporters, the women crying and protesting, and crucially, the article included testimonials. 20 different women, all named, all willing to go on record about how Stephanie had helped them. Clara Washington talked about her rent being paid. Dorothy Parker described how Stephanie saved her son. A woman named Evelyn Chase explained how Stephanie had paid for her daughter's college tuition to Howard University. Another woman, Martha James, revealed that Stephanie had given her $500 to start a small grocery store that now employed 5 people. The article painted a picture that Murphy didn't want painted. Stephanie St. Clair wasn't a criminal preying on the community. She was a benefactor, protecting it. By noon that day, something extraordinary started happening. Women began gathering at Mother AME Zion Church on 137th Street, one of Harlem's oldest and most respected churches. The act started with maybe 30 women, members of the church who'd read the newspaper article. But word spread quickly. By 2 p.m., there were over 100 women at the church. By 4 p.m., over 300. They weren't there for a service. They were there to organize. A woman named Ella Williams, a schoolteacher and mother of 4, stood up and addressed the crowd. "They arrested Stephanie St. Clair, and paraded her through our streets to humiliate her. But in doing so, they humiliated all of us. Every woman here has either been helped by Stephanie directly or knows someone who has. We cannot let them destroy her without responding." The women agreed, but the question was how? What could they do? They had no political power. Most couldn't vote. This was still decades before the full Voting Rights Act. They had no money compared to the police and the city. They had no official organization or structure. What they had was numbers, determination, and a willingness to put their bodies on the line. A younger woman named Patricia Lawson, only 22 years old, stood up with an idea. What if we blocked the streets? What if we made it impossible for this city to function until they release Stephanie? Some of the older women were hesitant. "Block the streets. They'll arrest us too." "Then they'll have to arrest all of us," Patricia replied. "How many jail cells do they have? How many officers? They can arrest one Stephanie St. Clair. They cannot arrest 300 mothers." The idea took hold. They spent the next 2 hours planning. They would stage a massive demonstration, blocking major intersections throughout Harlem. They would bring their children to show that this was about family, about community. They would remain peaceful but immovable. And they would do it in 48 hours on July 17th, exactly 72 hours after Stephanie's arrest. They needed time to spread the word, to organize, to prepare. Women left that church with assignments. Some were tasked with reaching out to other churches and community organizations. Some were responsible for creating signs and banners. Some were designated as coordinators for specific intersections. The organization was impressive, sophisticated even. These were women who'd organized church fundraisers, community events, family gatherings. They knew how to mobilize people. They just had never applied those skills to political protest before. July the 16th, the second day, the word spread like wildfire through Harlem. Church pulpits announced the demonstration, beauty salons became organizing centers, women talked to their neighbors, their friends, their relatives. The message was simple and powerful. They arrested Stephanie St. Clair for helping us. They paraded her through our streets to shame us. Friday morning, we make them understand that attacking one of us is attacking all of us. The police were oblivious. Captain Murphy, feeling proud of himself, had moved Stephanie to the Tombs, the notorious Manhattan detention center, to await trial. He thought the story was over. He had no idea what was coming. The white media ignored the Amsterdam News article. The New York Times didn't mention Stephanie's arrest at all. The Daily News ran 2 sentences about a numbers operator being arrested. Nothing about the community response, nothing about the protests. But in Harlem, in the black community, it was all anyone talked about. By Thursday evening, the organizers estimated that over 800 women had committed to participating in the demonstration. 800 mothers, grandmothers, daughters, sisters, ready to put their bodies on the line for Stephanie St. Clair. July 17th, 1936, 8:00 a.m. Exactly 72 hours after Stephanie's humiliating perp walk. The demonstration began. The plan was to block 5 major intersections simultaneously: 125th Street and Lenox Avenue, 135th Street and 7th Avenue, 145th Street and St. Nicholas Avenue, 155th Street and Amsterdam Avenue, and the most symbolic location, right in front of the 32nd Precinct station house where they'd taken Stephanie. At each location, women arrived with their children, with signs, with determination. They simply sat down in the middle of the intersections, not violently, not destructively. They just sat down and refused to move. The first location to shut down was 125th and Lenox. By 8:30 a.m., over 150 women and their children sat in the intersection. Cars couldn't pass. Buses stopped. Traffic backed up for blocks. Police arrived within minutes. "You need to move. You're blocking traffic." The women didn't move. An officer tried to physically lift one of the women, a grandmother named Sarah Mitchell. She didn't resist, just went limp, making herself dead weight. It took 3 officers to move her, and as soon as they set her down on the sidewalk, she walked back to the intersection and sat down again. The officer realized what was happening. You can't arrest 150 women without causing a scene, and every time you move one, she comes back. At 135th and 7th, a similar scene played out. Women sitting, police trying to clear them, the women returning. But here something additional happened. Men started showing up. Not to join the sit-in, the women had specifically asked men to stay back, because they knew the police would react more violently to male protesters. But the men formed a perimeter around the women, standing, watching, making it clear that if police got too rough, they would intervene. By 9 a.m., all 5 intersections were blocked. Harlem's major traffic arteries were shut down. And the women weren't just sitting silently, they were singing hymns, spirituals, freedom songs. "We shall not be moved," echoed through the streets. The police brass panicked. Deputy Inspector Robert Wagner called an emergency meeting at police headquarters downtown. "We have over 700 women blocking intersections throughout Harlem. Traffic is completely stopped. We need a strategy." "Arrest them," one captain suggested. "All of them?" Wagner asked. "Where are we going to put 700 women? The Tombs is already overcrowded, and arresting mothers with their children, that's going to look terrible in the press." "Then what do we suggest?" someone asked. Wagner had no good answer. At 10 a.m., the white media finally noticed. Radio stations sent reporters to Harlem. Newspapers dispatched photographers. What they found shocked them. Hundreds of well-dressed black women, many with children, sitting peacefully in the streets, singing hymns and holding signs that read, "Free Stephanie St. Clair," "Justice for Harlem," "Stop Corrupt Police," "Don't Touch Our Queen." The visual was powerful. These weren't dangerous criminals or radical agitators. These were mothers. The moral authority was undeniable. By 11 a.m., the demonstration had grown. Women who hadn't initially planned to participate saw what was happening and joined. The 5 intersection blockades now included over 1,000 women. And in a development the police didn't expect, the demonstration spread beyond Harlem. In Brooklyn's Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood, black women heard about Harlem's protest and started their own sit-in at Fulton Street and Bedford Avenue. In the Bronx, women blocked the intersection at 149th Street and Grand Concourse. The movement was spreading. What had started as a Harlem protest was becoming a citywide uprising of black mothers demanding justice. At noon, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia held an emergency press conference. "The demonstrations in Harlem and other neighborhoods are causing significant disruption to our city. I'm calling on the protest organizers to end this immediately so we can restore order." A reporter asked, "Mr. Mayor, the protesters say they're demanding the release of Stephanie St. Clair. Will you consider that?" LaGuardia bristled. "Miss St. Clair is a criminal who broke the law. The city does not negotiate with lawbreakers." But even as LaGuardia spoke, his advisors were telling him the political reality. The demonstrations weren't ending. They were growing, and the optics were terrible. The police couldn't forcibly remove hundreds of mothers without creating a public relations disaster. By 2 p.m., the pressure was mounting from unexpected places. White business owners whose shops were in Harlem called City Hall, complaining that they were losing money with the streets blocked. Bus companies said they couldn't run their routes. The city was losing thousands of dollars in revenue. At 3 p.m., a delegation arrived at City Hall. 5 black women, all well-known community leaders, along with 2 white lawyers and a representative from the NAACP. They requested a meeting with the mayor. LaGuardia, recognizing he needed to de-escalate the situation, agreed. The delegation was led by Ella Williams, the schoolteacher who'd helped organize the protest. She spoke calmly but firmly. "Mr. Mayor, Stephanie St. Clair has been a protector and benefactor to the Harlem community for years. The charges against her are based on fabricated evidence from corrupt officers who take bribes from white mobsters while prosecuting black entrepreneurs. We demand her immediate release and an investigation into police corruption." LaGuardia tried to deflect. "Miss Williams, I cannot interfere with the judicial process. Miss St. Clair will have her day in court. With respect, Mr. Mayor, the judicial process is corrupted when the police plant evidence and arrest people selectively based on race. Dutch Schultz runs a numbers operation 10 times larger than Stephanie's, and he's never spent a day in jail. The only difference is he's white and pays the right people." The room went silent. LaGuardia knew she was right. Everyone knew she was right. But admitting it publicly would mean acknowledging systemic corruption. One of the white lawyers spoke up. "Mr. Mayor, We're prepared to file a federal civil rights lawsuit if this isn't resolved. And with 1,000 mothers currently sitting in your streets, you have a choice. You can try to arrest them all, which will make national news and destroy your reputation, or you can acknowledge that justice hasn't been served and find a solution. LaGuardia was trapped. He couldn't forcibly remove the protesters without looking like a tyrant. He couldn't leave the streets blocked indefinitely, and he couldn't ignore the obvious truth that the arrest was politically motivated. He made a decision. "I'll make some calls. Give me 2 hours." The delegation agreed to wait. At 5:01 p.m., after calls to the district attorney, the police commissioner, and several judges, LaGuardia announced a compromise. "Miss Saint, Claire will be released on her own recognizance pending trial. The charges will remain, but she will not be held in detention. Additionally, I'm ordering an internal investigation into the conduct of Captain Edward Murphy and the 32nd Precinct." It wasn't everything the protesters wanted, but it was enough. Word spread through Harlem within minutes. Stephanie St. Clair would be released. At the 5 intersections, the women stood up, dusted themselves off, and went home. They'd been sitting for 9 hours. Many had brought nothing but water and sandwiches. Their legs were cramped, their bodies tired, but their spirits were soaring. They'd won. At 6:30 p.m., Stephanie St. Clair walked out of the Tombs a free woman. A crowd of over 200 people waited outside to greet her. When she emerged, they erupted in cheers and applause. Stephanie, always composed, smiled and waved. But when she saw the women who'd organized the protest, the mothers who'd sat in the streets for her, she broke down crying. Ella Williams embraced her. "You've protected us for years, Stephanie. Today we protected you." Stephanie could barely speak. "Thank you. Thank you all." The next day, newspapers across the country covered the story. The New York Times, which had ignored Stephanie's arrest, now ran a front-page article. "Harlem mothers stage massive demonstration, force city to release detained woman." The article described the 9-hour sit-in, the 1,000 participants, and the mayor's eventual capitulation. But the article, written by white reporters for a white audience, missed the deeper significance. This wasn't just about Stephanie St. Clair. This was about black women discovering their collective power. For years, decades, centuries, they'd been told they were powerless. They had no vote, no money, no official authority. But on July 17, 1936, they proved that none of that mattered when they stood together. They shut down New York City without violence, without weapons, just with their bodies and their refusal to accept injustice. The demonstration inspired similar actions across the country. In Chicago, black mothers staged a sit-in to protest police brutality. In Philadelphia, women blocked streets to demand better schools. In Detroit, mothers organized to fight housing discrimination. The tactic spread because it worked. It gave power to people who'd been told they had none. Captain Edward Murphy, the man who'd paraded Stephanie through the streets, never recovered professionally. The internal investigation LaGuardia ordered found evidence of corruption, though Murphy was never formally charged. He was transferred to a desk job in Staten Island and quietly retired 2 years later, his reputation destroyed. The charges against Stephanie were eventually dropped. The district attorney, facing public pressure and knowing the evidence was tainted, decided not to pursue the case. Stephanie went back to running her operation, but something had changed. She'd always been respected in Harlem, but now she was revered. She'd become more than a numbers queen. She'd become a symbol of community resistance. The mothers who organized the demonstration didn't stop with that one protest. Many of them became lifelong activists. Ella Williams joined the NAACP and spent the next 30 years fighting for civil rights. Patricia Lawson, the young woman who'd suggested blocking the streets, became a labor organizer and helped unionize domestic workers in New York. Ruth Morrison, who'd called the Amsterdam News, opened a community center in her beauty salon where women could organize and strategize. The demonstration had awakened something in these women, a realization of their own power. Years later, in the 1950s and 60s, when the civil rights movement used sit-ins and peaceful protests as primary tactics, many historians traced the lineage back to moments like July 17, 1936. the day Harlem's mothers blocked the streets and won. Today, there's a small plaque at the intersection of 125th and Lenox that reads, "On this site, July 17, 1936, Harlem mothers staged a sit-in protest demanding justice for Stephanie St. Clair. Their peaceful resistance helped pioneer the tactics that would define the civil rights movement." Here's what Captain Murphy never understood when he decided to parade Stephanie through Harlem. He thought he was attacking one woman. He was actually attacking every woman who'd been helped by her, every family who'd been protected by her, every child who'd been fed by her generosity. He thought showing strength would intimidate the community. Instead, it united them. He thought humiliating Stephanie would break her. Instead, it revealed just how deeply loved she was. 72 hours. That's how long it took for Murphy's victory to turn into his greatest defeat. 72 hours from the perp walk to the sit-in. 72 hours from humiliation to liberation. 72 hours from one woman in handcuffs to 1,000 women blocking the streets of New York City. They tried to parade Stephanie St. Clair through Harlem like a criminal. Instead, they proved she was a queen. And queens don't rule alone. They rule because their people love them enough to fight for them. That's what Murphy learned. That's what the whole city learned. You don't touch Harlem's queen without answering to her kingdom. And on July 17, 1936, her kingdom answered with such force, such unity, such undeniable moral power that the entire city had no choice but to bow.